Move it. Yeah. Okay. So.
And then like right in the middle should be like the bold laws. Man.
That it says bold laws.
Or it says bold laws, or just like I don't know. They just listed them in like straight print.
I don't know. We'll figure that out.
Oh, are we on?
Yeah, we're on.
Oh, that's cool.
We live.
What an intro.
All right. So, we're just admiring our badass wall in the background. Nobody knows where it came from. It just appeared. That's all we know. Everyone's asked.
Does amazing things.
Yeah, right. Everyone's been asking, where did it come from? And I've asked everybody, and everyone's like, I don't know. It just was here. And there are people who were here from the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's been here that long?
It's been here. I guess. I don't know.
That's
I don't know.
cool.
I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the whole thing.
Look, I'm not gonna lie. I was here for the longest time and didn't realize this room existed. But that's also because this used to be like y'all's old team room, right? So like I never came back here.
Yeah. This was the secret bunker that nobody had access to.
Pretty cool.
Private access only. All right.
Invitational.
So what's up, y'all? My name is Gus.
And I'm Chris.
And right now, this is the Anomaly Podcast, and we're still on the fence about what to rename it, if anything. I was actually thinking something simple, like just adding like the American Anomaly Podcast. And then that kind of plays on like, are we the American anomalies, or is America the anomaly?
Ooh.
You see what I'm saying? It's a play on words.
Man, it is a play on. I love a good play on words.
Right. So just something to think about.
Okay.
Anyways, so there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's all it all feels like it all kind of feels like a shit show. Let's be honest.
Still, yeah, resounding, just consistent shit show.
So, and I'm kind of on the fence, trying to see, like, watch the ruckus and figure out, like, okay, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? What's going to happen here? There's definitely a big shakeup in this whole thing. And the latest thing that's come about is the big, beautiful bill. One big, beautiful bill, or what'd you call it?
One triple B.
One triple B. One triple B.
One D cubed.
Is it? Yeah. One triple B kind of sounds like
it plays well on the tongue.
It also sounds kind of like a wrestler. Like the
welcome to the ring, one triple B.
Yeah, it sounds like a world wrestler.
I just did an announcement of wrestling for no reason.
Yeah, WrestleMania, right?
Did you ever watch wrestling?
I was not into it. My dad was totally into that, though. My dad loved that stuff. I think he thought it was real. I think he did.
When I was real young, I guess before I realized, before I, like, you could know, I kind of thought it was real. And then you realize that that's not real. And then, like, I don't know, I could never get into, I didn't have a lot of people who wanted it, but I could never get into it. I'm like, why would you?
Oh.
Wrestling is real.
We got a guest coming in. Hey, do me a favor, Todd. Can you close the door? Thank you, man.
Because we don't talk louder.
I know, right?
Wrestling's real. Not that wrestling. Todd.
He's like, our buddy Todd is like, from West Virginia, wrestling's real. All right.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways.
So, so there's the one big, beautiful bill. And it is an interesting bill, and there's a lot of controversy around it. I guess we can go through a couple of the top things that it covers, and I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts on it. And I guess I'm trying to figure out how this ultimately impacts. It does sound like this has a negative impact on, generally speaking, it just has a negative impact on revenues, and which is problematic because we are both in debt and have an annual deficit. So I guess I'd be interested to think about, like, what would be the goal of something like this, and considering our current situation. So let me just go through a couple things. So the permanent the 2017 tax cuts that Trump had during his last presidency are permanently extended now. So that means basically individual and business tax cuts from that time frame and the Jobs Acts are now permanent, and which were originally scheduled to be ended this year, right?
Oh, so they didn't just get extended; they got it's permanent.
It's
now.
law.
It's
now.
law now.
Yeah. So eliminating of tax on tips and overtime pay. This was really interesting to me because I thought this was actually I think this was actually good because though a lot of times like people who typically are working on tips and who take overtime are usually in a financial position where they have to. Otherwise, why would you? Right? Like, well, I mean, at least for people who work on tips, most of that population tends to be lower income, right, or just struggling, or whatever the case may be. There are few. I've met I've actually met a few people that made a career out of working in hospitality, for example,
and
and
a lot of money in it.
Yeah. But a lot of people really don't make a ton of money. You really have to work in a really specialized restaurant or in a really specialized area, and those don't exist everywhere. So the vast majority of people that work off of tips, they're really kind of living paycheck to paycheck or tip to tip, I guess, right? Night to night. So I feel like that would really be beneficial for those people. So that seems like a good idea. And then for those people working overtime, I would imagine most people working overtime, like they work overtime because they feel like they have to. Right? I don't know a ton of people who are like, I'm so excited to go to work more hours than I would otherwise have to. Right? So I would imagine that those people are going to work because they feel like they need the extra money for whatever reason. Right? That is. So I feel like this is going to really benefit. It seems like it's going to really benefit, people that are that could use the help. Now it does cap at 160. So once their earnings hit 160, then anything above 160 will become taxable.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that seems okay. I'm not bothered by that.
The tax it. I mean, one of the things I think that just stand out is like, well, so overtime, right? I'm just curious, like, do you know what overtime that is? Is it like overtime? Because some people work, you could argue overtime, right? Total hours, but they're not like overtime on the books for any one thing. So it's just if you're working with one company. And you get overtime pay.
Yeah. If you're getting overtime pay, like it's applied towards overtime pay.
And the tips for.
And that's also assuming, and the tips are gonna so it'd be interesting because it's all cash. Will people still claim their tips? I'm going to guess that they're probably not.
Why wouldn't they claim their tips?
Because you still have that $160,000 provision, and if you're like a high income earner in the tip world, you're probably only going to claim like up to 150 and be like, oh, I didn't make any more. I've stopped working for 3 months. Right? Yeah. But you probably have to space that out so you don't get audited, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like. So I kind of feel like I've got this feeling about like the tips being tax free, right? I feel like part of me is all for it because I see the benefit in having it tax free. But when I think of a tip, I think of something that like, is a tip a set thing or is a tip an additionally earned thing, right?
I would argue it's additionally earned.
Yeah. So then the question that I would have is that if the tips are going to become non-taxable, then does that mean that auto gratuities go away? Because if a tip is extra earned from like the work, you know what I mean? And now I think of it from the consumer, or from my perspective, the way I'm thinking of it is like, all right, so now I'm subsidizing as the consumer what should be a business expense if they just paid them more.
Yeah, but the problem is that you as the consumer, you're actually paying their salary, right? Because the restaurant really is not really paying their salary. They get paid like $2.30 an hour.
Right, but the question is that is it a salary or is it something that the consumer as a tip has control over? Like you go to restaurants,
it's pay for performance, basically.
Right. So you go to a restaurant, and you've got a party of 6, and then they auto grad you.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, if you're auto gradding me, like if you're auto gradding the consumer to pay for what you just called like their salary, but it should be based on performance and I don't know.
Well, so this goes into I go
back and forth.
I think this goes into a whole other question as to whether or not auto gratuity is reasonable or not. right? Because I think the argument for auto gratuity is it's probably happened enough where you have a table that's 6 people or more or whatever, and because the people at the table are not, maybe they're not savvy enough, or whatever the case, whatever the reasoning is, end up under tipping substantially the waiter, right? So this sort of, and you notice that doesn't typically happen for like 2 people sitting down for a meal. Typically that happens with parties of 6 or more, or 8 or more, or something like that. So clearly larger parties have historically have been problematic with tipping appropriately for service, right? So if I don't know that I have necessarily an issue if that is to help the waiter ensure that they're getting what is, reasonable for them for the work that they're doing. I guess you could argue that if the waiter is bad, you could make an argument against an autograt, right? But I feel like I would have to make an argument. It would be more beneficial for the waiter. It's more beneficial for the consumer not to have the autograph, because then the waiter has to really work to earn it. Yeah. Right. But
you have the suggested gratuity.
Correct, right? Which they typically have. Right. But I think the challenge is that even with suggestions, there have been plenty of times where a large party doesn't pay their fair share, even though the waiter does perform service and does a good job. Right. So then what do you do? Because the waiter is the one that is going to hurt the most in that scenario, because if they only get $10 on a $300 tab, right, then what? They got $10 to serve and support all of those people at the table, and that $10 is not really going to make that much of a difference for them. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I used to work in the hospitality industry in serving, and like I do remember having the auto gratuity on it, and it was helpful for specifically because I worked out on 192, which some of our audience might not know where that is, but we're local, we know where it's at. And it would be people coming in from other countries where like tipping is not the tipping culture. Yeah, it's just completely set up different, like specifically over in like Europe and stuff like that.
Yeah, because they pay like salaries.
So they would like tip like, they would tip like 10%. And then when I was serving, it was like, I feel it was like 12, 15, and 18% or something, or maybe it was 10, 15, but like 10 was like on the low end. Like you were shooting for 15, 20%.
Right.
And so whenever you got one of those, you're just like, damn, like that does suck.
Yeah.
But I don't know if, I mean, I guess the numbers, I mean, that logic makes sense as far as like potentially historically larger parties just haven't done. So I digress to that point because it's still, I don't know. The other concern, I guess, is, I think that you were mentioning earlier, it's just like the loss of revenue
for
the government, for the
the bigger
budget,
picture. It's not good for the nation. It's good for the employee. I guess you would say the
1099.
I guess they would be a 1099. Are waiters 1099?
No, because I was an employee. I was just an employee without benefits.
I gotcha.
So like when I was serving, I think I got like $2.15 an hour.
Something like that. Yeah, it hasn't increased very much.
No, not at all. Absolutely not.
So it does help, like, people at the bottom. And I don't want to say people at the bottom, but I guess it does help the people that are you and I,
160,
like people that are making below 160, that are in these fields where tips and overtime are a thing. So I feel like that for them, that's really good. And I would imagine that, those folks can really use that could really benefit them and their families. So that on its face is good. It doesn't solve the problem of our deficit and debt, but it does help those people.
Yes.
Right. So the other thing is the increased standard deduction. So the standard deduction rises from $1,000 for a single filer to $2,000 for married couple, which is nothing.
Negligible. Yeah. It's at 24,000 right now, right?
It
was.
I think so. That sounds right.
Yeah. So that would put it at 26.
Yeah. So not a big deal. So the maximum child tax credit increases to $2,500 per child.
What was that?
I think it was 2,000. So it's not really that much of a difference there either, right?
Percentage wise, it's not bad, but like when you're talking nominal numbers, it's not.
There's a way to make it sound great, but it's not that much of a difference.
I would have thought, like, if I'm thinking I was like 5,000,
that would have been a big difference.
I think that would have been, and it's a psychologically pleasing number, probably and it's a meaningful number. Man, I got 3 kids. If I could deduct 15,000 as opposed to 6, yeah, that'd be super super helpful.
Right, and you can't sell them. I mean, not anymore.
No.
So it raises the SALT deduction cap, right? It looks like it increases it to 10 to 30,000 for individuals earning up to 400,000. So this was something. So I wasn't as familiar with this deduction, but I think that's because we don't have this in Florida.
No,
so state and local tax deductions, we don't really see that typically in Florida, as far as I know. I mean, if that does exist, I'm just not familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
The senior tax benefit is now $4,000 as a senior bonus deduction, which is for retirees. Now, this is subject to income-based phase-outs. Like I think we were talking about that earlier.
Yeah,
and that seems like that's probably the more money you make. Right.
Unless you receive up until a point, and then it just phased out.
It eventually phases out. Auto loan interest deduction, so a $10,000 deduction for any cars purchased that are U.S.-based vehicles. So I thought that was interesting. I'm like, okay, it's a nice deduction to get there. And then termination of IRS file program. I wasn't very clear on what the purpose of this was. So the bill ends the IRS free tax filing tool within 30 days of enactment, and it replaces it with a proposed public-private partnership for tax filing services. So I'm not really sure why they felt the need to do that. So the only thing I can think of is I know that the administration is trying to completely restructure the IRS. So maybe this is part of like phase 1 of that to change how all that is ultimately going to be done. So, but otherwise, I can't think why you would, I can't imagine that managing that website would be so expensive that it'd be not worth keeping.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and the decision of what else you might be able to take away.
So I'd have to learn more about that to get more insight on that. So the challenge with these all sound great on the face. But the challenge with these is that it equates to about $4 trillion in revenues that we now no longer receive. So that's a debt. Well, that's I don't know if that's a debt or a deficit issue. So
that adds to the debt.
The debt.
Yeah. So unless you've got offsetting revenues, it will drop. It will drop to the bottom line.
So the challenge is that if we're running, if we have a debt problem and we have deficit issues, like cutting taxes like this makes that, like it exacerbates that. So then I'm trying to understand what would be, it's great for the individual person, bad for the national debt.
I mean, they've been talking about doing this for like a while. I don't feel like it's been a secret.
No, right? It's not been a secret at all.
But it's something that I've said, I feel, since the beginning, in that I don't understand how you're going to fund these tax cuts, right? Without like, you're either drastically, which they are, doing some work stripping the government, but you do these massive tax cuts, and then you've got, the only change really in revenue is tariffs.
Yeah.
And, when you were talking about these early policies before, it sounded, I guess, a little better because the tariffs were so high, but now we're negotiating tariffs back down.
Yeah.
And it's like, are they long-term? So if they are not long-term, then you're going to end up over time adding back to the deficit.
Yeah.
If you've reduced that. So it's I think
that,
I don't know what the top line strategy is.
I think most of the tariffs, it sounds like they're probably going to keep like a 10% tariff for most things, unless there's some kind of a trade arrangement of that otherwise, because like India, for example, just negotiated 0% tariffs going both ways. So, but it sounds like there's going to be like 10% tariffs on most things coming into the United States. That's what it sounds like. They're going to keep most of that in place, at least 10%. Now, that may be changed for certain specific industries where there may be a national interest to ensure that those industries stay strong here. So, like, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if steel and aluminum, those stayed high, like tariffs stayed high on steel and aluminum to ensure that American companies buy steel and aluminum here in the United States, keeping those industries strong, because those have a national interest. There's a national interest to have those industries here, right? You want to have those kinds of materials here to build. God forbid we get into some kind of a war of some kind. We want to have the industry here to be able to build the things.
To build that stuff.
Yeah. Same thing with semiconductors, right? We want to have that here. So they're going ahead and incentivizing corporations to do that. So that makes sense to me. And it makes sense that you'd want to make it more challenging to get those things from outside the country so that there could be companies that are here making those things, and they can be profitable making them here in the United States. Because otherwise, all things being equal, the person buying the widget, doesn't matter what the widget is, typically they're going to be looking for the lowest cost, the highest quality for the lowest cost is usually what they're looking for, right? So, and the likelihood is that we as a nation are going to have a hard time. We could potentially be a nation that builds some of the highest quality, but it'll be real difficult for us to be both the highest quality and the lowest cost. The lowest cost portion is going to be the hard part.
Sure, the scale factor is so much larger just because the cost to make, the labor factor.
Well, so because our labor costs are just higher. Yeah, it's just so much more expensive to pay Americans to do work compared to other nations. So like, I feel like we could
So how does that? I don't want to get tangent, but like, how does that work, right? With affordability right now being already a challenge, just like with trying to move those industries, which inherently is just going to have a higher cost, right? If we're talking about like steel, and if those costs are going to be passed off to the consumer, we're going to eat it in some fashion. I'm not suggesting we're going to eat all of it because it gets spread out through the supply chain.
It'll get spread out to the supply chain. So I think it won't be as impactful, specifically if it's super specific elements. So like when you buy a car, that is obviously made from steel. So there will be some impact in the cost of that car being built here in the United States because of the cost of steel. So we'll definitely see an increase, most likely, in the cost of vehicles. And I think there are some tariffs that may be specific to the car manufacturing industry, which one of the reasons why we want to have car manufacturing here in the United States is because if you can build a car, you can build anything. Like with a car manufacturing plant, that plant can build anything. You can build planes, you can build tanks, you can build like that just needs to be reconfigured. But if you have a car plant, you can build anything. So I they're definitely going to be protecting those types of industries, and there are going to be some increases in cost for those things. What I wonder is like, is the public going to be okay with, because I think the challenge is going to be, I can buy an American car and then I get, let's say it's the same price as, let's say, a European car. Let's say the American car charges the same amount as a European car, the Japanese car, whatever, right? But I get the additional tax deduction on the American car loan, right?
The $10,000.
Yeah. But if the American car, like, I wonder from a quality perspective if that's going to make a difference. Like, will people be more? Will they pay more attention to the quality of the thing that they're buying, right? If it's now becoming more expensive to buy the thing. Do you think that would have an impact at all? Like, the more expensive a car gets, do we pay more attention to the quality of the vehicle, or do you think that just becomes like the new norm and people just buy whatever they can afford?
You mean if this scenario plays out the way that you?
Assuming that, let's say, because steel is going to obviously be an expense, right?
Yeah.
So the likelihood is so a couple things, right? Steel is going to be more expensive, and then tariffs are also going to be playing a role in the cost of foreign vehicles. So foreign vehicles are going to automatically be more expensive, by default, right? So that means American vehicles that potentially could be sold for less money. Let's say, for example, they can build a car.
Now they can sell it for more because they're able to compete.
Because they can compete, against the tariffs.
Yeah.
So the Japanese car is $40,000. They can sell it. They can technically sell theirs for $35,000, but you know what? They're going to sell it for $40,000 because they think it's competing. Like they feel like it's the same car, right? So I guess my question is.
So they'll sell it for more.
Yeah, that's
the market.
Correct, because they're going to go. They're going to match the market, right? Will people start paying more attention to quality? Because we're such a consumer-based economy. Like most of the time, we throw things out and just get a new one. That historically, that's what we've done. Now, as the economy weakens and as people feel like their dollar doesn't go as far, or they feel that they're nervous about where the economy is going, they're much more cognizant of like where they're spending their money. Are they going to be like really paying more attention to the quality? Like, how long is this car going to last me? When I buy this $40,000 car, like the last $25,000 car lasted me 10 years. If I buy a $40,000 car, is it going to last me 10 years? Yeah, will it last me 15 years, right? Yeah. If I, you know what I'm saying? Like, can I get more for my money on this more expensive vehicle?
I mean, I think that like that'll come down to like there's still a lot of strong brands. Like I don't really think that we're going to see like new brands per se come up. Right?
Yeah. I'm talking about the existing brands.
Right. But I think that like I feel like to your point is like, is the car going to last me that long? Like, I mean, you can talk like Honda, right? Yeah. So even if it's not an American brand, but if we're talking about equally competing because of prices from quality, I don't think that like Honda would need to prove its quality, right? American but in American cars, yeah. So it's like, I do feel that like we would be under those companies and those products would be under higher scrutiny from the American consumer.
Yeah.
I think, especially if they're paying more, unless you're just a diehard
Americana.
Yeah, I'm buying in America. It doesn't really matter. And there's people out there. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't know. And I've always been, and you know, it could just be like built from what it's like that American cars are just not that great right now. Like comparatively speaking to other.
And they have waves. Like I feel like there's certain cars that have come out.
We crush it in the truck sector.
We do
understand
for the most part. That, well, I don't know because the Tundra right now is like
the Tundra. Well, I remember the Tundra, man. The Tundra, I had that. No, I had a Tacoma, but like I remember when trucks were trucks, right? Even like the Tundra, but now the Tundra looks like a.
I mean, it's one of the top performing vehicles on the market right now. You know that's a vehicle which was interesting to me, and I don't know if maybe it's because of access. Maybe it's just an access thing. But like countries that don't have like military vehicles, they use Tundras. They use Tundras. That's crazy.
That's interesting because I feel like now I'm like seeing like when you're over in movies, it's just in movies, but like when they're over, I feel like maybe Tundras are like the trucks that they.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
but like
they're beastly because they're wide and like they can climb.
So they're good quality truck. It's a great truck. You know.
So then it's like if I had to make a quick decision, right, or if I was making a decision in the market, like,
and it's also backed by Toyota. It's a Toyota brand
that has been backed by a history of doing it.
That's why people buy it.
Same thing with Honda. Yeah. So arguably, I would still say it's like I don't know if I would pay equal dollar just to buy American.
Yeah,
like
now, but it's not equal dollar. Remember, it's equal dollar plus a tax deduction, right? So there's the benefit.
Yeah, the benefit. Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So you get the tax deduction of the interest being paid.
But how much more are you charging for the car? You just in that scenario you charge $5,000 more. If you get a $10,000 tax deduction, that's only at a 25% tax rate. That's $2,500.
Yeah, but okay. So now you're over logicking.
You know,
right? Right. So like the average person who goes in there and they look at the benefit of owning this vehicle versus that vehicle, they're going to see these cars are both like equal pricing. They're not thinking that this one is $5,000 more. They're like, these are the same.
I mean,
price.
I would be looking at, do I feel like it's going to last as long? Like
Correct.
Yes.
But I guess my question is that will the average American do that? You know what I'm saying? Because that is, I think, because I feel like American cars are not going to be any less expensive than cars coming from other countries. I feel like they're going to price at the same rate as other countries are going. Like, it would be great if they didn't, but I feel like they're going to just go to the market.
I feel like today's consumer is so much more savvy and so much more informed.
Maybe, but I mean, but you still look at all the American cars that are out there, but American cars are not considered to be one of the highest quality vehicles. Like, if you had to go and say, "Hey, you need to buy
the highest Ford." There's Ford and Chevrolet. There's right. Who else?
Dodge, which is Chrysler.
Oh yeah, Dodge, Chrysler,
which is all GMC and GM and whatever. So I mean, it's not that they're bad cars. Like the cars are fine, but when you think of a high quality vehicle, hey, I want to buy the best quality vehicle, right? And the best quality vehicles right now that are at least historically known to be high quality are not American, right? You think Honda, you think Toyota, you think even Subaru.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, Subarus are people buy a Subaru, and
I think Kia now too.
Kia's starting to get a good reputation.
Yeah.
But that's recent though.
I feel it's been over the course of the last 5 years.
That's still recent.
That still is recent
compared to Toyota's decades of. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They have decades of quality. So I would say Kia is relatively recent.
Comparatively speaking.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So and the other car manufacturers are not necessarily known. I guess Chevy has, like you said, people know Chevys for their trucks, right? But not necessarily for their cars. I guess some of their, but they're what it is that Americans have is we make really cool muscle cars. So all of American cars, muscle cars, people like them because they're just beefy.
They're just beefy
and
it's like an American staple from back in the
So that's one thing that you get a Charger or Challenger, that car just looks like it'll kick your car's ass.
It's loud. Yo, as it's going down the street, as it's going down the road.
Yeah, you get a Hellcat going on. Yeah. You're like, okay, that's an American car, right? Yeah. So, but that's the reason why people get them, because they're just this, it's a statement. It's just to be like, hey, it's traditional Americana, right? Mm-hmm. So, will that continue to be the case? We've had the luxury of being able to do that, and as the economy starts to tighten, are people going to still take advantage of that? Are they going to still go that direction, or are they going to be more? They're going to want to get something that's more economically viable for them. You know what I mean? So. But I guess that goes back to the culture, American culture. We have a culture of keeping up with the Joneses, and cars is usually one of the main ways that we do that.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be I think it is going to come down to quality in the sense of resale, right? Because I feel like that's also how you prop it, just like any asset, right? You prop it up. So it's one of the things that I look at, and we're not going to know until we get into the market, but what do the leases look like? The lease options.
Oh, that's interesting.
Look like on that. Yeah, because you know how they calculate lease. You know how the leases are calculated, right? So leases are calculated as the depreciation of the car over X amount of years, and then that cost divided. You're paying for
the depreciation of the vehicle.
The depreciation of the vehicle.
Oh, interesting.
For whatever period, and it's negotiable. So
that makes sense, because then that way, when they get it back, then they're like, "Oh, we're selling the car less the depreciation of what you used it for."
You can buy it back for whatever.
Right, I see what you're saying.
Whatever you have. So sense. It's you're playing. There's two. I'm playing, right? Because if I'm getting a lease, this is how I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about whether or not I'm going to be able to. If I'm leasing the vehicle, am I going to be able to buy the vehicle from them at a better price, at a good price, right? So if it's I don't know, call it $500 a month, right? So that's $6,000 a year for 3 years. So that's $18,000. So am I going to lose? What does the value of that car look like versus the $18,000 that I paid?
I got you. At 3 years.
At 3 years, because that's the price at which I'm going to be competing to sell or to buy that vehicle in that market. Other people are just looking. It's I don't want to buy the car. I just want the option to be able to
change it out or whatever.
Change it out in 3 years. So it's kind of what they've put us in on our cell phones.
Yeah.
Right, where you do that.
Yeah. The upgrade, the annual, or in this case, every 3 year upgrade or whatever.
But But that's how they price it, and that's why they give you the
so I guess
the mileage restrictions too, because it's also based on
certain number of miles.
Certain number of miles.
Yeah. So I guess it would make sense if you're going into a down market to consider a lease.
Yes, because it would be lagging.
If you want to buy the car.
If
you wanted to buy the car out, would it make more sense for you to lease the car?
No, you'd want to lease it at the bottom. Because you're locking in what you can buy the car, because your lease, you're going to buy out your lease. Typically the way the lease is that you buy the lease out.
Okay.
Right?
But is it based on the original value?
Yeah, because it's based on the lease terms.
Oh, not necessarily what it would sell for today?
No, which is why I'm thinking about what the market price of that car is going to be versus what my buyout of the lease is going to be.
I see.
Which you negotiate through the lease terms.
I gotcha.
Right? So you're
negotiating today's price, and then if tomorrow's price, the price is higher, that benefits me because I bought it at today's price.
Yeah, so you're negotiating today's price, and then you're negotiating the terms in which you're paying.
It's like buying futures, essentially.
Yeah, you're kind of making a speculative gamble.
Yeah, interesting. I never even knew that.
But then you also say to yourself, it's like, well, that's just me thinking really deep into it. But it's like you could just say, well, do I want the option to buy this for this much money in 3 years?
Yeah.
Right? Do I know if I want this car or not? I don't know. So maybe I'll lease it for 3 years.
I gotcha, yeah.
So there's some qualitative stuff. But yes, it's definitely leases.
Okay.
So that would be I feel like that would be a good indicator of how well or how badly the resale value of the American car.
I gotcha.
Is. Because then you would think that the lease would be higher.
Right.
If the resale value becomes lower, because now you're eating more of that cost.
Which is typically why Toyotas tend to have higher value on their leases. Their costs for their lease are higher. Is that right?
No, the costs for their leases are lower.
Because they resell better?
Yeah, because if you buy the car for $50,000 and they're only assuming $2,000 in appreciation over that 3 year, that's $6,000 that you're going to be paying for through the term.
So it's actually better for you to get a higher quality car when you lease.
Yes. I mean, albeit all of the different other incentives that the dealership may be, but yes, just in the raw nature, if you were to measure the lease, that's interesting. That's how the dynamic of that works.
So now one of the things that I know we digressed a bit.
I know, but I enjoyed that conversation so much.
So one of the things that the bill does suggest is there will be a long-term sort of GDP growth, but it's only 0.6%.
How are they going to get the long-term GDP growth?
Well, the idea is that by reducing taxes, right? It gets more. It infuses more capital in the markets.
The velocity of the dollar increases.
Yeah. So it gets more cash will be willing to go into the markets. People will have more cash in their hand to be able to do things, more likely to buy things, and consumerism will continue to move forward, right? Mm-hmm. Because people feel like they have more money to spend. Now, I don't know if there is and there may be a short-term boost on that, or it may play out over time, but it's still going to end up being, it's still not going to make up for the deficit, because you're really talking about, I think it was 17% of GDP growth from all of that, right? Where it ultimately impacts how revenues come back to go back into the growth of our economy. So we still have a shortfall of 83%. Mm-hmm. So the question now becomes, well, how do you make that up? Unless the only thing I can think of is maybe the administration is thinking, I'm trying to think in my mind, what are they thinking? I can't imagine you have this many people that are just not paying attention to this. They have to be thinking through this, right? Mm-hmm. And trying to figure out what is the there's some goal at the end of the tunnel. But the only thing I can think of is that they're trying to maybe the only thing I can think of here is maybe they're trying to create an environment that that is growth, that is for the purpose of growing out of this scenario that we're in, through economic, I don't know, incentivizing economic growth through capital investment and people being more comfortable with the ability to consume and stuff like that. And over time, that will turn into something. But I'm really having a hard time seeing that in reality. Like I'm trying to figure out like what would be the incentive to wanting to do this. And the only thing I can think of is by having all these tax cuts proposed into the system, it does incentivize capital to go back into the system. Is that enough to be able to grow out of the problem that we're in? And I don't know that is, because when we're talking about $4 trillion shortfall. So will that be enough to be able to grow out of the problem? Because I mean, we're in such a big problem. I can understand the thought process of we can't save our way out of this. I can understand the thought problem, right? Like we have so much debt, and we're an ongoing machine. It's like if you're not making money as a business, right? And I'm just trying to think from a business perspective. If you're not making money as a business and you know that you're seeing shortfall after shortfall after shortfall, right? You're not going to be able to save your way into like prosperity. Like you can't. Like you got to figure out a way for your business to make more money. Like you got to find a way to grow your business so that you make more money, so that becomes then, instead of a shortfall, you start getting, right? You start getting profits, right? You actually start getting more revenue to actually get profits, and from a business perspective. So I can understand the thought process behind that. I just don't know how. I don't see that part of the equation playing out, and I don't know if there is there's a setup happening for this so that can happen in the future. Because right now I don't see that. I just don't see it. So I guess my concern would be is these cuts are great for these cuts help a certain group of people. It definitely does have some benefit for individuals. It does have some benefit for capital investment. It does not seem to have any benefit for the national debt. So how is the national debt going to be addressed? Is there what is the idea behind getting the national debt back on course? Because I think that's where we're running into an issue. I know that there are some cuts being proposed, and some of those cuts, there's discussion of cuts being proposed as it relates to Medicare and stuff like that. But I don't even know that that's really even going to be enough, even if you were to theoretically get those passed, which I don't think you would. I'm not sure if it's Medicare or Medicaid, but even if you got those passed, I still think that wouldn't be nearly enough to cover the shortfall. Like you have to figure out a way to generate more revenue. Like that ultimately has to happen. We have to figure out a way to generate more revenue. How are we going to possibly do that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm not seeing right now. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if there's a setup here to set up an environment for a lot more investment into our country. I mean, obviously, the administration has talked a lot about corporations coming in and investing, like Apple and, these other corporations investing tons of money into doing things here. But even Apple, I don't know that that's going to necessarily create a lot of jobs. Like if they manufacture anything in the United States, the likelihood is that most of it's probably going to be automated.
Yeah, manufacturing in the United States is definitely going to be automated.
You know what I'm saying?
So that's also something that has been in the talks. Like that's the confusing factor on bringing manufacturing back over here for the purposes of. I mean, I get it for the national security stuff, right, on those major things.
Yeah.
But to sell it as bringing jobs back over, I just don't really see that being, especially if we're going to be competitive. With however it's happening, you need to have, there's going to be automation.
Yeah, I think automation.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, it will bring some
tasks.
It will bring some jobs. It won't bring
Sure.
jobs the way that manufacturing used to bring jobs.
Which I think is what people think.
Sure.
Right, when they see that. And then, I've been saying for a while now, my concern with them the administration proposing these tax acts. So now, yes, I'm familiar with like the pieces of the big beautiful bill.
Yeah, the one triple B.
Yeah, the one triple B.
One triple B,
but
baby.
I've always said it doesn't make sense to me. Like, you're proposing all of these tax cuts when we've got a tax deficit, when we've got a tax liability issue, we've got an annual tax deficit, and you're trying to, and the only change is the tariffs coming in, which were going to be, maybe that allows American industries to sell at a higher point. But then also, where are you relying on your point, the tax, the revenue from the top line, right? And you can say that you're cutting expenses and stuff. You can argue that that's what Doge was there to do, but like we're dealing with like pennies when we really need to be dealing with dollars, like big areas to sit to like bring that number back in play.
Yeah.
But like the question is like, for a $4 trillion deficit, I mean, that means that we have to bring $4 trillion to the table just to be able to chip away at the debt. And we're at what, 37?
We're almost 37 trillion.
Almost 37. So call it 37. So even if we got ourselves in a position to pay $1 trillion a year annually off on that debt, assuming no interest, which
right. It'll take more of a quarter century to get it paid. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like I still feel like, and it's not just how it is now. I think it's just more prevalent. But it's always been the narrative where they've got the population focusing on like this microcosm. Or they just make us jump back and forth. Like here, now the debt is important and we're going to structure the policies and the message around what the debt looks like. But right now, what's important is like affordability and people keeping more money. So we're going to structure things around that, and we can kind of get away with stuff that might not be good for this because the spotlight's not there right now. And I feel like I personally think that there's no way other than you have to increase revenues. So how are you going to, what are the ways that you can increase tax revenues?
So I kind of brainstormed with ChatGPT on this to kind of see like what are ways that we could potentially do that? Like what are other ways that we could generate revenue? Because I think it is a revenue problem. At this stage, it has to be a revenue problem. It's not.
Yeah, because you can't save yourself. You can't
we're already in it.
Yourself out. Like you've got to be able to like aggressively attack
revenue.
The revenue.
We got to figure out how to make
so
more
that
revenue.
You can aggressively put money down onto the debt.
Some of the things that ChatGPT came up with, which I thought was interesting, was broaden the tax base. This would be closing loopholes, eliminating special interest deductions, and reducing like evasion. So I don't know how to go about doing that, but that would be.
That's cleaning up the IRS code.
Correct. The other one would be introduce or raise taxes. So this is obviously the opposite of what's currently being done on capital gains, corporate profits, high income earners, which is typically what you hear from the left, right? Which is kind of raise taxes to help cover the cost. The value add tax, right? This is a VAT tax, which a lot of other countries do. I don't think we have the ability to just implement a value add tax. So I think that has to
be agreed to by the states.
Yeah.
And stuff,
so that's something that would take a lot more time. And it is plausible that maybe the tariffs are a way to introduce this idea to the country of adding tax revenue through tariffs, and then changing that up to be a VAT tax on international products, right?
Okay.
So I can see that kind of shifting over to that model, and then the states kind of.
Who pays the VAT tax?
This will be consumer. It'd be a consumer tax.
It'd be a consumer tax.
Yeah.
On domestic stuff?
No. Only on. In theory, it would only be on imported things, because that's how VAT taxes typically apply in other countries.
Okay, so you just shift the language from tariff to tax.
Correct. So, and then the VAT tax is effectively like it's a, and then when you buy a product, if you have a domestic product that has no VAT tax, and then a product that's coming from overseas
has a VAT
tax, right? Or if another country has a VAT tax, and then you decide is it worth it paying the extra money for the thing that you're getting overseas? Maybe. I mean, it may still be cheaper, right? Or it may be the quality of it is better, or whatever the case may be. So that could be a way to do that. Carbon tax, which I'm on the fence about carbon taxes. So
I think that one's tough because that's a social economic issue.
Yeah.
And until the country comes to terms with the social grounding on where we're at there's no discussion around it.
Yes.
I mean, there was carbon taxes on like corporate-owned companies for like, but that, didn't they get rid of that in the first Trump administration?
They did get rid of some of that.
The carbon emissions or like the penalties for quote polluting, if you want to call it that.
So now the example that ChatGPT says here is a 1% VAT could generate over $100 billion annually in revenues. I don't know if that's accurate because ChatGPT is not always accurate, but and I don't know if they're making an assumption on 1% VAT on all products sold, or is it just on things that are coming in from out of the country, which most things would be coming from out of the country.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to kind of do that calculation to see like, because a 1% VAT on like most things would be pretty negligible. I think most people probably wouldn't even care.
Yeah, and it would be unless it's paired with other significant things, is completely negligible to the pay down of the deficit too. Even the 100 billion, but
you get 100 of those, right?
Yeah, but you can't have 100.
I know, but what I'm saying is
100 addition.
No. What I'm saying is that if 1% will give you, assuming that this is correct, if 1% would give you 100 billion, right? Then you could probably get up to like 3 to 5% before people really are like pushing back on it, and get about 500, almost $500 billion, right, in additional revenue.
Okay.
Which that is a little bit more significant. You know what I mean? Not to say that that's the number that it has to be. I'm just giving an example, right? Because I think the majority of people that need to buy a widget now, obviously there's an expense there. No one wants to pay more for stuff, but the thing about it is that consuming is something that for with the exception of like food and water and like your rent and stuff like that, which you're not going to get VAT taxes on most of those things. Everything else is usually a choice. Like we can choose to spend the money or not spend the money, right? I can choose to go get coffee. I can choose to buy this mug, right? I don't need this mug. I can buy any mug, right? So like consuming is something that we as Americans could have. Well, we could have also control over. So we can control where we consume, how much we consume, versus let's say property taxes. I have no control. I'm paying property taxes. If I own a property, I'm paying it.
Oh, we might not be.
I know that may change.
Change.
But I'm just giving you an example, right? So like I have no control over that, right? Fuel. If I pay tax on fuel, I need a car. So we don't live in a place, like if we lived in New York, maybe you can get away with not having a car, but we don't live, most places in the United States, you need a car, right? So like if I have a car, I'm paying taxes on fuel. I need fuel. It's sort of an essential item for me.
Well, those are some of the inelastic things in our economy, right? Like there's some things that are just, it's price elasticity.
Right. You have to have them.
Yeah. So it's like, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's a breaking point, right? And where you're just going to see people making tough choices. But I mean, your essentials,
I think that if you didn't if we had like a VAT tax, and at the very least the VAT tax could not be applied to what would be considered essential items, right? At least, because even if you said, oh well, everyone has to pay a VAT tax, but maybe the American products pay a much lower VAT tax, and products from other countries pay a higher VAT tax, as an example.
So globally, we're competitive on the VAT tax percentage that we charge
right?
in the market.
And then that way, there's still some revenue that comes in from domestic products. There's still some revenue and there's more revenue that comes in on international products, which most of the products would be coming from other countries, right? And then the essential items are not taxed at all. At least not. There's no VAT tax at the very least. There's no VAT tax on them. Then that would give consumers the most choice in where they spend their money, and then how revenue is created. So if I know that it's going to be a little expensive for me this month, I'm not going to buy that widget on Amazon, right? I'm not going to buy, you know what I'm saying? I can choose not to have those things. It's inconvenient, but
I kind of wouldn't be surprised if we see, I don't know if it'll come from this administration or the next one or where it would come up, but I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if we're moving away from like individual taxing to see a measure or something brought up increasing sales tax.
I mean, that's a consumer-based tax, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know if I'm not putting it out there. I don't really want to, but it's like, I mean, if they increased, what are we at? Well, we're at 6.5%. Well, that's a state.
Yeah.
Well, here, so federal tax here in this state. So is that how that works?
No, it's state tax.
We don't have state tax here.
Well,
state tax for sales.
Sales tax we do, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
so usually, I wonder if if there will be like that. Is that what that ad valorem tax is? So it's like when I go and buy something in the consumer, that there's just like, so you got sales tax and then there's a
VAT tax on top
of that. If you had a 3% VAT tax, so your total taxes that you're paying on the sale is 10%. How much do you think that would impact your consumer-based purchasing?
It'd probably slow me down, but I'm not a huge consumer. Like my wife and I are not huge consumers of things. So, but I mean, honestly, like anytime we buy anything, like we're kind of thinking twice as, do we really need that? Right. Yeah. So, we're not accustomed to doing the traditional, like we don't celebrate a lot of the consumer holidays and stuff like that. You know, like I don't buy my wife flowers because she doesn't like flowers, and you know, like it's a nice gesture, but she's like, you know what I mean? It's flowers. You're gonna die in like 5 days, right? So, so we even got away from even buying stuff for Christmas because we found that that wasn't the reason we should be celebrating. Like people just an expectation, like there was this sort of stress and expectation for physical things. Yeah. Right. Every Christmas. That, and we're like, man, what? And then, you know, we would buy the kids stuff and they just toss it. Like, you know, and we're just like, man, they don't appreciate anything that we're giving them. So we just switched over to doing more experiences on Christmas as opposed to doing things. So that we had we'd have our dinner for family gatherings and we told everyone, hey, listen, no Christmas gifts, and nobody listened.
Of course not.
Everyone just still brought gifts, and then we're like, man.
Oh, you're going to be mad at me?
Yeah, right.
It's all right as long as you know I'm doing it
for you. Don't expect reciprocity on that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, the challenge for us for like Christmas has been like, and that's one of the reasons we don't really visit very many people for Christmas because they always feel pressure to give us something, and we don't want people to feel pressure to give us something. So we're just like, hey, we'll just wait till like it's not Christmas and then we'll go visit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that way we know that they're not going to feel that pressure. Like if you go on a random like holiday, they're not going to be like, oh, I wanted to give you a gift, right? Most people are not like that. But if you go on Christmas, everyone has the thing in their head, oh, you know what? Gus and Jackie are coming over. We should get them something. Oh, but they don't celebrate. They don't want to do that. No. We should get them something.
We should still get it. Yeah. We should just not acknowledge that.
Yeah, right.
Just go ahead and get it. Are they going to be mad that we got it? Actually.
Yeah. And it's hard because, like, you know, and the problem is a lot of times people give gifts because it's like what they think. Yeah. Like they're not really paying attention to the person. And then, like, you end up getting, like, junk.
Oh, I like this. Gus will like this too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
we're the same person.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, people just don't know what people like. So they'll just get the thing they think would be the good thing to get, right?
Yes.
So I don't know that it would necessarily, I mean, it would impact us in that, like, we would just be paying attention to, like, okay, is it worth the extra tax for this thing? Is there something else is there an alternative that would also work? So it would make me think differently about buying things. If that had an additional 3.5% VAT tax, right, versus that thing that doesn't have the 3.5% VAT tax, and then what's the difference in pricing for the things, right? And then how much is the thing that I'm buying? Like, is that 3% going to be like an additional $3 to $5, or is that additional tax going to be an additional $300 to $500? right? Depending on the expense of it.
Well, what if you just did it on like, because that thing that you just said, right? This was just ChatGPT, but you said that for 1 billion at 1%, it'll provide
1% VAT tax, according to ChatGPT. We'd have to do the real math on it. But it's making an assumption that 1% VAT tax would add an additional $100 billion to revenues.
So what?
Because we're such a high consumer-based economy, that I feel like
1% on what?
1% VAT tax on products.
On all products. That's what you.
I don't know. I don't know if it's assuming all. I'm assuming it's probably taking that based on just what consumerism is in general, and adding 1% to that, and then coming up with a number of 100 billion. Right? If you did the math.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Yeah.
Like, what's 100 billion divided by?
Well, I'd be interested to know if that's like you said, all, because I'm thinking like you'd want to do like heavier markets, like 1%. Is anybody really going to feel 1% extra over time? Like if they did it on like groceries and stuff, right? Things where you've got a solid.
Wow, that's such a big number. It doesn't even know how to register it.
What is it to the power? What power is it to?
To the power of 3. So that, what is that?
3 more zeros.
100. 100. What is that? 100 million, billion, trillion,
quadrillion.
Really? What's our? I'm trying to divide 100. What is it? 100 billion? It said 100 billion, right?
Yeah, 100 billion by
divided by 1%.
0.01. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, by 1%.
1%.
So it says here's 10 quadrillion.
100,000 million billion.
10 trillion. 10 trillion. So do we have 10 trillion in sales?
That would be the top line GDP, right?
Is that sound right?
I don't know. I have no idea.
What is our current GDP? I mean, that probably includes like
that. Yeah, that's going to include shit. It's not going to. I don't know.
Be calculated. So, anyways, this is what we'd have to do the real math to figure out what that real number is. But if that's even remotely close,
yeah. But what's our GDP? I just want to know what our GDP is, even if it doesn't. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, if that's even remotely close, I mean that could be pretty impactful. And 1 to 3% would be, I mean, pretty significant.
I don't know. It's $27.72 trillion in 2023.
So this is assuming 10 trillion of that is. This is assuming 10 trillion
has a VAT tax.
As a VAT tax.
And that gives you 100 billion.
100 billion in revenues.
Man, that just is so like. It's crazy you talk about those big numbers.
I know.
It's like 100 billion. It's like, but that's not a lot.
I know.
It's like a drop in the bucket.
You're like, and that's it?
Yeah. Meanwhile, as we say that, it's like look at it all.
That's a number we can never see. Yeah.
Oh my god.
So that's interesting. I think a VAT tax VAT tax to me seems like that would probably make a lot of sense to kind of figure out how to include a VAT tax. Because I feel like that would be really impactful, and it's specific to consumer spending. So that is not something. As long as we can identify essentials that are not taxed that way,
mm-hmm.
I think that would make sense, because that means that we have control as to how much we're being taxed.
Yeah. But you still, you got to grow your way out, and we still need to do expenses. I just had this like random thought. I'm just going to spit it off the top of my head. Just kind of curious what your thoughts are. So it's like, I feel like we need to grow. If we could drastically increase the top line,
mm-hmm.
right? And we're pushing companies to come back here to America to manufacture, to build products, or even if it's just, I guess, individual income. But it's just like you get to a point, right, where it's like, I don't want to call it a ceiling. You get to a point to where it's like, after you've made so much, so like we have this scale of taxes where you pay X amount of dollars up to this, and then it just doesn't get taxed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What if that like gap, the top bracket was so wide? I don't even know what that number would be. And then this number again, there was a higher tax.
So there's a big gap of
There's a big gap, but what it does is it kind of, and I don't want to use this, but it limits the upward growth of the very top.
Yeah, but that's
because it kind of creates what's called an asymptote in mathematics.
You're getting really way too technical. But here's the challenge with that, right?
And then
once you get to that stratosphere, like you can make the numbers look like whatever you want. It makes it really like it's almost impossible to track. Like once you're making that kind of money, like
talk about like a company, like an Amazon.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So it's like there comes a point to where it's like, we could arguably place a measure on there to where it's like, hey, you can still substantially
like a corporate tax that happens at some level
on the top end. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, so it's like, and then close the loopholes, right? And maybe there's I'm all for a sunset, right? So it's like you put this is the plan. Corporations, the largest of the largest, the biggest of the biggest, the wealthiest of the wealthiest, who can actually weather this and actually make an impactful difference.
Yeah.
Over the course of the next 20 years, this is the plan, and this is how we're going to buy our way out of our own problem.
So
then it would sunset.
Right.
At those measures, but like, I feel like we're just always attacking it year by year, and it's not a year by year problem.
Right.
It's a long problem.
Yeah.
And to the goals of the 135.
Yeah.
Right. That we use here in our business. Like, here's the big goal. So then what are the three, and then what are the pillars to build around that, knowing this is the goal.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about when they want that deficit to be. They don't talk about when we want our debt to be gone. It's always talk about the deficit.
Right.
Which is not the debt.
Right.
Deficit is current annual fiscal year shortfalls.
Well, I think the reason why that conversation happens is because if you can address that, right, and you can make the deficit, you can switch that over to being positive, right? Mm-hmm. Then that will lead us to paying off the debt. And I think that's why that conversation happens, right?
Yes, but it's short. Yes, that is exactly why it happens. But it's short-lived in the fact that it's like, then the conversation is just
year over year.
It's just year over year. Decade over decade. It's like, you're chipping away at a wall and you have no idea what wall you're chipping at.
Yeah. No, I get it.
You know what I mean?
It's interesting because one of the things that ChatGPT also talks about, not exactly what you're talking about, but in general, the idea of just reforming the taxation policy in general. So that's interesting that you brought that up.
I just think that there needs to be, they always talk about, now he's talking about pain in the markets and stuff, right? The administration. But it's like, I would argue that there needs to be there's going to be a pain. Like, we can't have everything that we want while these are two different problems. Like, we can't have reduced taxes and not have
increase in revenue.
No, we can't have a reduce in taxes and start chipping away at our national debt.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You get what I'm saying?
Well, without some kind of revenue.
Without some type of revenue. But it's like, and I'm not suggesting that individual, people who are making $100,000 and stuff like that are the ones who are paying. That's why, when I'm talking about like corporations where all the money is at, like, we kind of need like a major reset. Yeah. Right. And then once that reset happens, you want to start talking about like no taxes or being more fiscally responsible in the year and actually balancing the budget.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about balancing the budget. Nobody's ever
Clinton did.
Clinton did balance the budget, didn't he?
Yeah.
But that was 30 years ago?
That was in the 90s, yeah.
We've had 4 other presidents since then.
Yeah, it's been going bad ever since then.
So, but it's just, and I think if somebody spoke in that context and laid out that big picture plan and how that would, as the reasoning behind why taxes are going up or arguing for, it's like, where it's not, you're not baiting it against, the wealthy needs to pay their fair share. It's more, it's like, hey, so we're asking you to do this because you can do this, right? We're not saying that you don't earn or you haven't earned what you've earned, and
you benefited from the grain, from the capitalism.
And in order to make the market stronger and the American consumer stronger.
So the argument that you're going to hear from people who are in those businesses are going to say, well, why do I have to pay? Because the federal government has been so fiscally irresponsible.
Because you failed to vote correctly. They can't say that, but I would say that. It's because you failed to vote correctly.
Well, I mean, they're not the only ones voting, but I mean, I think that if you are a corporation and there's a bunch of shareholders, I think it would be a hard sell to make something like that happen, only because the corporation that is working within the confines of the rules that were created and they benefited from those whatever those rules are now then saying they're going to perceive that as a penalty because the federal government has exceeded their ability to spend, right? And now they're in a financial they're dealing with financial.
But how challenges. Is that any different than choosing a subset of the working class who's going to pay a certain amount of taxes and who's going to be exempt? Like the taxes down here are now $160,000 in tips. Mm-hmm. You don't have to pay taxes. Like, how is that any different?
I guess corporations are people too, so I guess
they got for that. They got the rights. They got First Amendment rights. They can put their money wherever they want.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And I'm open for that discussion or to that be a discussion.
I just didn't realize that you were a communist, so I wasn't.
Common.
So I that's interesting. That's an interesting proposal. I don't know if it would garner a lot of traction, primarily because there's such a strong lobbying arm that would probably fight against something like that, and that would make it really difficult for that to come into reality. But it would be interesting to see that.
And however, sorry, I just think that in general, that if somebody just started the conversation with that larger plan, mm-hmm. with that end game, regardless of whether or not they took, that was just that was just the thought that came. But whatever that is, and then tie that back into what they're doing today, mm-hmm. which is going to impact the next 4 years, which is going to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I feel like we can actually make some pretty solid headway.
Yeah.
But, I guess that's just not really what sells in politics.
Yeah, I mean, we need like a 20-year plan. It's basically
yes.
Yeah. And right now we're not really talking in terms of like 20-year scope. No. So one of the other things that ChatGPT talks about real quick before we wrap it up is just kind of investing in infrastructure, which that's interesting that ChatGPT would kind of say that, because what it's suggesting here is like R&D, education to boost productivity, which can increase GDP and over time expand the tax base. I don't know if I would. That's a tough one, because investing in infrastructure means more spending, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's suggesting by doing this that there would be growth stimulating. This would be a growth stimulating policy. The other thing that it suggests is labor force participation incentives, such as childcare credits, vocational training, or immigration reform to grow the workforce. So, I guess you could. A lot of these things have a cost to them. The question is what kind of would they ultimately turn out on the other end as really having GDP, like impacting GDP? I mean, it's suggesting here that a 1% sustained increase in GDP can improve the deficit by hundreds of billions over a decade, which again, not a ton of money if you're talking about over a decade. We need, like, I guess, a bigger
no,
impact.
But then if you think about it, then you start talking, it's like, well, it's not a big impact over the decade, but over the next, if we're talking about 30 years, what would that be?
Well, it's just saying a deficit by hundreds of billions over a decade. So hundreds of billions over, let's assume it's 500 billion over a decade. That's like,
okay, so 30 years, that'd be 1.5 trillion.
Over a decade.
Over a decade.
I mean, you're saying over 30 years, 1.5 trillion over 30 years is not that much. Over 30 years?
It is if you're chipping away at the debt. It's like, okay, but the question is like, now we're going back to the deficit, right?
Well, this goes back. Okay, so I would say it's not that this is a bad thing. The question is how, because you still got to spend money to get these things to happen.
Well, I think that's the long term. I think that's, and I'm not arguing to do that, right? Because it's the balance of the short term. But I'm assuming that it's taking into consideration what we pay in repair cost infrastructure.
Perhaps it may. It just says growth stimulating policies, so it kind of gets into R&D, which I understand. R&D makes sense because research and development to improve technologies and all kinds of stuff, right? Medication, right? That can definitely have some benefit. And I do think for R&D, because I think one of the challenges, for example, for pharmaceuticals is we essentially subsidize all of most profit-based pharmaceutical companies by doing the R&D for them,
and then they give them the patent,
and then they get the patent, and then we get nothing, which I think is completely ludicrous. Education to boost productivity. There's so much education out there. I don't know that education is the problem. So I mean, in theory, it sounds like it could be the problem, but I would say, if you're going to say education to boost productivity, I would say, like, for me, I think we need to become. Right now, we've become a gig-based, labor-based income society, right?
Mm-hmm.
We used to be entrepreneurial, right? More entrepreneurial in nature. That's one of the reasons why we were able to kind of the Industrial Revolution and all these other things, right? Very entrepreneurial minded. We kind of we brought the farmers out of agriculture, put them into, right, and then we started building. A bunch of people started creating businesses, and that kind of developed, and that was kind of a big thing for the United States for a long time. And I feel like we've kind of gotten away from a lot of that.
You said a long time, meaning like as of recent, or like back in?
Well, I mean, right after the Industrial Revolution, and people then started having better. They were in a better position to be able to make decisions for themselves. They, when you got into the getting out of the 40s, going into the 50s and 60s and 70s, a lot more entrepreneurial based businesses started like evolving in that window of time, right? So, and we then started creating like corporations, like in the 80s and 90s, and then the 2000s came, and those corporations then super exploded with technology and stuff like that. And then now we're kind of in a place where like you have all these huge like monolithic corporations that employ these huge swaths of people. So when they do a layoff and 10% of their workforce is getting laid off, that's like 100,000 people. You know what I mean? So you're just like, what the hell? That's a lot of people getting laid off in just one fell swoop, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that we've gotten away from, sort of being entrepreneurs. And I think that is one of the leverage points that we have, because we can leverage other workforces outside of the United States, right? We have a lot of resources here. We have power resources, we have internet resources, like we have access to capital here, right? And as a country, I think we need to be better at teaching people what it means to be entrepreneurs. And not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, right? And someone's going to work for someone else who's an entrepreneur, but it's not really for everyone. But I think there are a lot of people out there that could be entrepreneurs if given the right circumstances, given the right education, the right knowledge, understand what resources they have available to them, and then be able to build a business where we can actually provide, services or products. I mean, most likely services to other people here domestically or even internationally, right? Especially if we know that we have access to virtual assistants, and you can still. Some products will be built here, but you can get stuff built in other places and ship them here, ship them to other countries, or whatever the case may be. Like, there are ways for us to do that. And I feel like that would be more beneficial than trying to just give people like a general education about things. Right? Going to college is not what it used to be. You know what I mean?
No,
like, I would even say trade schools are probably more valuable than going to college unless you're going to college for a specific. You're going to college for a specific profession.
That requires higher education.
Yeah, you're going to law school, or you're going to be a financing person, or you're going to be in medical. Or whatever.
I think that investing in like early education, both in the teachers, so that because. You're just not going to convince me that teachers get paid enough for what they do.
I just don't think they're teaching the right stuff.
Exactly. So it needs to be a reform in the curricula, because arguably the curricula hasn't changed in 60 years, and the curricula was meant to deliver
manufacturing
workers, like labor line workers, right? Employees, right? With pensions, like the goal was you go to school, you go to a company, and then that's like your school until retirement, and you're working towards this pension.
Yeah.
Right? And that works.
When you grow within the company, and stay there for 40 years or whatever the case may be. Yeah. That's gone.
So, and I just lost my point.
Investing in teachers, education.
Oh yeah, and then just changing the curriculum and like what's important. Like our curricula doesn't embolden entrepreneurial thinking.
Not at all.
Right. So I would argue even in the 80s when we had that explosion of entrepreneurial thinking, that's just because you had a time where like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and I'm just going to name those two, but like you had some real big key players who are really making waves in this ocean where there really wasn't a whole lot of big things.
Yeah.
And I think that sparked a lot of creativity and build up. And then now we just are at a point where there's so much and you can like freelance more stuff, which I think is a unique.
It's like gig economy.
Yes, set up. But that's entrepreneurial. But you can build. But it's a weird, like it's not your traditional, I guess.
Well, it's not really building a business. And like freelancing is like it's basically identifying short-term jobs.
Yeah, it's like contract work.
Right. It's just jobs. Basically, I'm a freelancer, so I find jobs.
Well, I mean, freelancer is not the right thing, but like you could just like blog or just like you could just do something and not actually build a more like I guess tangible like product sale business. You know what I mean? But there's a few people who do that.
I mean, that's a service. That would be a service. I mean, I guess the difference between having a business and being a freelancer, in my opinion, is someone who has systems that are in place versus someone who is just kind of finding work as I go. Yeah. Right. So like, I think that's kind of the difference. And then the other difference you could argue is like you have systems enough that if you had to remove yourself, you could put someone else in that seat. They could just follow the systems and the company still works.
It still works.
So that's to me a business where freelancing is more like I am the business, right? Yeah. And then I'm just doing work. And even if I'm marketing my services, I'm still kind of freelancing because I don't have any systems in place. Yeah. If I left, the business would be gone. It's really the job, right? I am a person who's filling a gap for someone. And there's certainly value for that. It's not that there's not value for that. It's just you as a freelancer, you haven't really built a business, right? You just have the ability to access a bunch of jobs. Yeah. So I think that if there's a better system to showcase, and this would help, I think, tradespeople, this would help people who would just provide services, freelancers, gig economy people, like this would get them to understand like how they can get what they're doing, systematize it, and then turn that into a bigger like business where they can actually generate real income. You know what I mean? Which is very different than just like, I got to find my next gig, right? I just got to find my next setup, which, I mean, that is I would imagine a kind of if you think being an entrepreneur is scary, like that to me would be like terrifying.
Oh, freelancing, I don't understand how that's like seconded to people who just up and move into another country.
Go up and move into what?
Just another country.
Oh, that's the same. You're saying it's synonymous with that.
Yeah, for my fear level. Right. I had some friends who did that, and I'm just like, they went over there. I think neither of them have a job. I'm like, what? Yeah. I'm like, I don't even know what risk aversion meter you're on, because I like that's just to me like I can't wrap my head around.
Right. But I mean that's the thing. But I think that our education system needs to be more in line with that type of thinking. And that getting a job is good. You can find a job. There's nothing wrong with that. Like there are going to be some people who prefer the simplicity of I just get a salary, and there are going to be entrepreneurs who need people that just get a salary and just get paid what their for their hours of work. Like we do that for admin, right? Like an admin doesn't want to get paid on a per closing basis. They prefer to get paid. Like a true admin prefers to get paid
salary.
I get paid, first and 15th, right? Yep. And this is how much I get paid, and maybe there are bonuses tied to that, but the first and 15th, there's a check coming in, right? Yeah. So, there's a place for both of them, and what I'm suggesting is like rather than corporations being the only sort of entrepreneurial endeavors.
So that was a very like short list of.
No, I know that, but my point is that right now the only sort of entrepreneurs that you hear about now are the Bill Gates and the Steve Jobs, who they have a corporation that's so big you don't even consider that entrepreneurial anymore. They're just huge corporate conglomerates. Yeah. Disney was an entrepreneur at one time, but now Disney is like this ginormous conglomerate of businesses and companies, like so far removed from the idea of entrepreneurship.
I mean, I just think that entrepreneurial, you're just going to start seeing, and I don't think that we're there yet, but you're just going to start seeing a shift in what is considered entrepreneurial, or like the businesses that come about that. Because you've got when you got these companies that are so big, like it's like they've just by their sheer size have created like a moat. Like you can't really, like, what are you going to do? You're going to go and open up another, like a brick and mortar store or an online store that's going to get as big as Amazon?
You don't necessarily have to get as big as Amazon, right? Like the goal is not to get as big as Amazon necessarily, right? The goal
but
is
I think that's what I'm just saying, that people's minds, like,
that goes back.
You can have a good business. I'm not suggesting you can't have a great business selling with an online store, selling stuff. It's just that, like, I don't even know where I was going.
Well, I mean, you know, the idea of competing against, and this goes back to like entrepreneurial thinking, is like my competition is not necessarily everybody else out there, right? I am my own competition, and is there enough business that I can take some market share enough that I can make a living doing this, right? And that's really the question. And if the answer is yes, then can I develop that business so that I can do that? And then once I get there, then I can start thinking about, well, can I expand to make more than what I need? Or can I grow so that I can get more and live a better life, right? What can I do? What is that going to take, right? So it's all steps, right? It's first is like, can I do this and be independent and not have to worry about some other job or side gig or whatever? And if I can get there, then from there, once I get there, then I'm like, oh, well, if I can do this, can I expand and make more money? Is there a way for me to make more money? And because we're such a consumer-based economy, like typically there's enough business out there, right? So like there are a few industries that are super saturated, but there are still people that are coming into even those businesses and still finding a way to take market share. And I think a lot of that has to do with like how are you presenting to the market, and are you able to share something that is more valuable than the other options that are out? And if you're able to do that, then that means that you're able to effectively steal market share from other businesses. Like, you know, most of the time people think about, the cheapest and fastest, but most consumers understand that while that is one filter you can use, like the value of the thing that you're getting is another filter that a lot of people use. Right. It's the reason why people buy a Mercedes versus a used like Ford. Right. Because the value that I'm getting out of the Mercedes, I know that if I buy a Mercedes, even though it's more expensive and it's more expensive to maintain, my Mercedes will probably last me 250,000 miles if I really wanted to. One, and then I get that extra. If it was important to me, the extra like I'm driving a Mercedes, right?
And it's white.
Yeah, exactly. So so there's a couple different functions that provides, because that gives me some status in society, in addition to the fact that it's just a really good, well-made vehicle, right? So I do feel like value, people will appreciate value. And if you can come to the market and, not just compete on price, which I think is a mistake from a lot of entrepreneurs that they do. We see that in real estate. They're like, oh, I'll just reduce my compensation, right? To make this work, right? And not really showing value of like, well, can you show that you're worth the compensation that you're offering? If you can't, then that's what you need to work on. Right? Because a person who feels like they're going to get the value out of it, they'll pay it. And we know that because there are other agents that are in the market that are able to do it.
Right.
So people are willing to pay for value. You just got to show them what the value is. If you can't show them the value, then you're going to be a commodity, and they're just going to bring you back down to what does it cost? Right. So as opposed to what are you bringing me? So I do feel like that's a big conversation, and like that's a big part of like this whole entrepreneurial adventure is understanding that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually reading a book from Alex Hormozy.
I just ordered a book from him last night.
Yeah, he's great.
Which one are you reading?
Well, I got $100 million offers and $100 million leads.
That's the one that's coming today.
Yeah,
the offers one.
It's. I mean, he really talks very pragmatically about this, right? So I mean, it's stuff that some of the stuff I was like already familiar with, and then some stuff I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wasn't paying attention to that he really kind of identified. But I mean, he really kind of comes from this idea of like, hey, you really got to show people like why it is that you're valuable. Because if you show people why you're valuable, then it's not about the cost anymore. It becomes less about the cost, right, and more about what you're bringing to the table. Yeah. So I really and I've always been about like how to bring value, and he really does a great job of kind of like a model, I guess you could say, a framework to bring that. Yeah, to bring that. So it's really good. So I've been listening because I do audiobooks. So I've been listening to his book over and over again to just kind of really make sure I understand like the framework of what he's talking about. That's actually some of the paperwork up there of some of the stuff he does. Yeah.
So funny that you brought this up because I like literally was laying in my bed last night and I just
it's a good book. I highly recommend it. But I thought that was great. Like that type of mindset is the way that you have to think about business. Like what he talks about in that book is the way that you have to think about business. Because if you're not thinking about business that way, then you're going to run into I can just do it cheaper than the next guy.
Yeah.
My burgers are going to be $1 less than their burgers. And then they're going to be like, well, then I'll make my burgers $1 less than their burgers. And then now you're in a race to zero, and that helps no one.
No.
Right? Yeah. Eventually you're going to get to a point where I can't afford to make it any cheaper.
Yep.
And now where are you at?
Yep.
Right? Now it's
the lowest of the low.
Yeah. So like, what can you do? And what he talks about is like, well, don't just offer the burger, like keep the price the same, offer the burger and say, hey, listen, my burger includes lettuce, tomatoes, all the fixings, right? Onions and blah, 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 mm-hmm. Right? And then in addition to that, I'll also give you a side of fries. In addition to that, I'll also give you your choice of soda. And you know what? Your choice of soda is unlimited. So you can have as many sodas as you want, mm-hmm. right? And then if you want to add a layer after that, if you stay if you stay in house and you eat your burger and fries and your soda, I'll even give you a free second option of fries if you stay and eat in my restaurant. Right. Mm. So like, how do you add more value to the thing that you have so that you don't have to bring down your pricing? Right. And if people see that versus the burger that's on the other side, that's cheaper, they're going to be like, well, yeah, but I get so much more when yes, this is more expensive, but look how much I get. Like, why would I go over there? Like I get so much more here. I get so much more value here. And I think that mindset is where entrepreneurs need to be at. Because that really is a game changer. And I feel like that's where our economy needs to lean. We need to lean heavy into building entrepreneurs again. And we're not doing that at a high level. Mm-hmm. Right now, being an entrepreneur, for a little while, it was like it was almost like I don't know what you call that. Like it was a fad. Like people just called themselves entrepreneurs, right? But they didn't really do anything.
President, CEO of me.
Yeah. And it was kind of a fad, not realizing, hey, there's a lot of work you got to do into this, right? So you just got to, keep that in mind. But I think that I guess that instinct to want to be entrepreneurial, I think is good.
Yeah.
I think it just needs to be leveled with like the reality of like, hey, and you're going to be fucking hustling for a long time before you actually see like real results, like at a high level, mm-hmm. and be okay with that. Right. And just be okay for the suck for a little while. And then you'll start building up that pipeline of business, and then you'll be in a good place. Right. So I thought I totally smashed what his version of it, of how he says it. He says it way better than I do. But I thought that book was really, really insightful. So I think you'll like it.
Excited to read it.
Yeah. So that's my take. I think that's where we need to be. So I know that you got places to go, and we're already past our time. So I appreciate you.
think
so. If you guys have any thoughts on anything we've talked about today, or there's anything you want us to kind of chat about, please leave a comment below. I appreciate you. Thank you for watching. Please like, please share, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Later. Yeah.